So, as African youth, we ask, what is the use of the United Nations, which to us has become synonymous with scandals, unethical, demeaning campaigns, and destabilization activities of the African continent? What is the use of the United Nations, really? Maybe the Secretary General of the United Nations needs to come out and address this question to us as African youth, because we constitute 70%. If I'm not mistaken, 75% of the African continent. And so I ask, what is the purpose of leaders giving speeches at the United Nations General Assembly? Are these speeches of any use in any way? I mean, what is the idea behind these speeches? As an African youth and someone who represents the African youth, I think that majority of the leaders go to the United Nations General Assembly to emphasize, from my point of view, their hypocrisy, while very few of them go there to present the grievances of their people, and these very few are not paid much attention to by the majority who go there to emphasize and maintain the status quo. Now, we ask as African youth also, who is preventing the reformation of the United Nations to reflect the global realities of today? And can we call out these groups, whether they are the neo-colonial groups which emerged after 1945, or the colonial groups or colonial countries? If the United Nations cannot be reformed, then the African countries have the right to leave these organizations. Let us abolish the United Nations, or let us leave it to the Anglo-Saxons, the Europeans, and the Americans, and the Western world, because they are the ones who are benefiting from it. They are the ones who have continued to use the United Nations as a tool for colonialism and destabilization of our continent, of our affairs as Africans. We say this with the remembrance of the past record of the United Nations. Let the United Nations, as an organization that is supposed to be unilateral in its operation, be reformed, as originally proposed by the late President Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. The UN has to rotate. Let it go to India, let it go to China, let it come to Africa. Let the headquarters of the UN, as a body which does not only represent the Anglo-Saxons, rotate around the world because it belongs, at least according to its documents, it belongs to all the citizens of the world. That is what they say that the United Nations represents. So if the United Nations represents the citizens of the world, let it rotate around the world. Let the headquarters rotate every 10 years, every 5 years to different continents. I think that these nations have the ability to host the United Nations. But how can we account for the fact that it is only in New York that the United Nations can have its headquarters for the last 77 years ever since its formation? If we continue to move in this direction and accommodate this kind of hypocrisy, then we are feeding colonialism and neo-colonialism ourselves. Why keep it in a network where, why keep this important organization in New York where the Europeans intimidate and blackmail everyone? This place is now the headquarters and has become the headquarters of Anglo-Saxon intimidation and blackmail. I think that the Europeans and Western countries are in the minority when it comes to the world population. So there's no reason for us to have the United Nations at the headquarters of the Anglo-Saxons. It is unacceptable. Africa has been calling for the reform of the United Nations since 1960. 1960, when Dr. Kwame Nkrumah started this call. It has been more than 60 years for us. It is a long time. It is a long time for us. And this was after the failure of the United Nations in the DRC. The DRC is a country which needs to be critically looked at as an African country, for that matter. The failure of the United Nations in the DRC did not start yesterday. It started a long time ago. In the 1960s, where it was used to murder and assassinate a full prime minister, Patrice Lumumba, by countries such as Belgium, which participated, the United States and its CIA participated, Britain, and because of greed and thirst for African resources. So how can we continue to have faith in such an organization such as the UN? And I think, as someone who represents the African youth and the next generation of leaders, I think that the UN as an organization has to be accountable to the citizens of the world. That day of accountability for the United Nations is here, because it cannot continue to engage in dark activities while the global citizens are watching. We now know everything. And this is the rejection that is going on in the Congo of the UN. This is the rejection of the UN that is going on in Mali. It is the rejection of that hypocrisy. It is the rejection that is going on in Ethiopia. Why? Because we want to see a UN that does not only focus on Africa, but focuses on the Middle East, focuses on Yemen. We want to see the UN in Yemen reining in on the genocidal activities against that country, reining in on the genocide and apartheid being carried out by Israel in Palestine. We want to see the UN accountable. Recently, the richest man in the world offered the United Nations the 4 billion it claimed that it can be used to stop hunger. And the richest man in the world asked the United Nations to give accountability of how it is going to use the 4 billion to stop the hunger in the world. And the United Nations failed to account how it is going to use this money if the money is given to it. So it turns out the United Nations is not accountable enough. And so, as a humanitarian organization, as a global organization, which is constantly soliciting for funds, lost that opportunity for the richest man in the world to provide funds, to sell his stock and provide funds for hunger to be eliminated as a claim by the United Nations that we need only $4 billion to eradicate hunger. So it turns out that the United Nations, in many cases, is using sensational campaigns, sinister campaigns, which are not true. So why would the United Nations not provide accountability so that the richest man in the world can give money to eradicate hunger? So we want to see the United Nations accountable. And that is what we are asking for. That is all we are asking for. We want to see it reining in on the genocide in Palestine that is being carried out by Israel, without acting in haste to redeem itself with its highly paid and extravagantly paid salaries to the battalions of officials trotting around the globe. The citizens of the world are going to continue to reject the United Nations and its openness. And its openness to being used by Anglo-Saxons and the Western world for colonialism against the rest of the world. People are going to continue to reject the United Nations until it closes that door and it is no more open to the Anglo-Saxons for colonial purposes. All we are hearing is scandals and aiding colonialism and working against Africa. Politicization of whatever slogans and agendas that Anglo-Saxons and white supremacists and the Western world wants to politicize: human rights, democracy, freedom. So we ask a question: who has done so much to undermine these tenets of human rights, democracy, freedom, and liberty more than the Anglo-Saxons, the Europeans, Americans, and the West? Who has done so much to undermine these virtues? I leave you with that question. My name is Kwame Gonza, and the channel is called Africa Reimagined and Connect Africa. And I'm an African. And I'm saying that the UN has to be accountable. Africa must unite. Africa must unite.